What Anthropic is doing with Claude reminds me of Amazon, and not in the way you think. You see, we had this whole situation going on, right? Where a lot of people got excited when, hey, Claude has very deep partnership with Figma. There's some integrations. We're going to do a lot of interesting things in terms of Figma designs, leveraging the Claude code, and essentially being an extension from the software code to the visual representation in the UI, right? So very nice tie-in, a lot of partnership opportunities out there. And then if you fast forward like what, 6 months or so, not even I think, yeah, like a few months forward, you realize that, hey, Claude Design is actually kind of like directly aiming and taking away the value that Figma provides. And Figma stock dropped initially by 7%. I think it's down 15% plus by now. Again, there are other factors. Economy is a little bit shaky, right? So there are a lot of different reasons why Figma stock can be affected. But Claude essentially launched a design that kind of potentially replaces some of these other applications, right, in your tech stack. And this continuous conversation about simplifying the tech stack and leveraging AI, which a lot of enterprises have, including the one that I'm working in, right? You start thinking about, wait, if they partnered with Figma, did all of this, and now released their own version of it, and even their like chief product officer was on the board of Figma and like resigned 3 days before the announcement, and he is a chief product officer. He absolutely knew, right? Or they actually absolutely knew, right, that this was coming, and they were still part of very strategic discussions on the Figma board. What is this reminding me of? And the more I start looking at it, it reminded me of our good friends in Seattle, the Amazon. And essentially, Amazon went into this like very interesting situation, and they publicly denied it initially when some of these reports came out, where they realized, guys, we have all the sales data for all the different product lines. And we also have pretty good understanding, or we have an ability to get to the point where we understand very well the profitability, the margins, we know the supplies out there. There is something we can do about it. And Amazon slowly started exploring and saying like, hey, there are certain product categories where we can enter, produce a decent enough quality of a product at a healthy enough of a margin to make a ton of money and essentially crowd out any other vendor in that space. And that's what became kind of like Amazon Basics, right? A lot of things like toilet paper, paper towels, basic charging cables, I think pens, baby wipes, things of that nature, slowly start popping up on your feed, on your like whatever you call it, like a I guess search feed when you're on Amazon and you say you're looking for one of those products, right? All of a sudden Amazon basic products start showing up a little bit higher and higher. You see more and more reviews that absolutely are glowing and people saying how amazing of a product it is. And you start realizing like, yeah, but what happened to all of those other products in those categories? Because they have no way out competing Amazon on Amazon's own platform. And that again became a thing, and Amazon denied it. But eventually, more and more information came out, more and more like emails, internal project files came out that essentially just were openly talking about the fact that like, yeah, we're absolutely doing this, right? Like we're sitting there, we're a public company, we're trying to figure out how to maximize our revenue. So we absolutely, once we see the opportunity, we're going to go and get it, because stock price goes up means I make more money as an executive, which means I'm happy, everyone else happy, shareholders are happy. Who cares about all these small businesses that are potentially being, taking off the market completely because of the fact that they no longer can compete with the mastodon of Amazon. And that reminded me of Claude, because think about it now. If you kind of like, yeah, I think, oh, here, sorry, I forgot where I put this visual. If you think about all the different opportunities in those areas, right? And again, you can argue that there are other verticals, other areas you can kind of like look at. And if you even look historically back at the Claude's partnership with Cursor initially, right? That's where they learned a lot, and they kind of like saw the idea of going towards, hey, we can actually release something like Claude Code, right? And potentially not exactly, but to some extent directly compete with Cursor as a company as well. So you start seeing this kind of like trend of, wait, like in Amazon days, when Amazon was able to make that move, they were able to make the move because they had access to the data. They knew exactly what sells, how well it sells, and kind of like who are the main competitors are. Guess what's happening right now all over the world in the SaaS world? You want to guess how many Fortune 500 companies today have Anthropic or OpenAI, right? Like one of these applications installed throughout their infrastructure and being leveraged in various different ways, especially if it's a SaaS company. Claude Code is a popular tool, right? So chances are 90% plus, right, of those companies have at least one license. Probably if one license, like 99% plus, maybe some personnel, they also use it. So you have all this information being piped through Claude. And Claude, of course, like even if you ask it directly, or if you talk to, anyone at one of these companies, you ask Dario, right, the CEO of Claude, they will say like, yeah, but when we're absolutely not using this data, like we don't have access to, like we're not piping in the data, all this private information, which I believe to some extent. I believe they don't look at like all of your personnel data, or if you upload your like salary information, social security, like they probably have some safeguards that ensures that Claude does not ingest it, but they still can see, I bet, enough to derive from in terms of like, hey, what are some of the popular use cases? As an example, right? Like if there's a certain type of use case, like again, project management, right? Like workflow management. There's so many companies that do this today, and they see that people are attempting and doing something interesting with the Claude by connecting MCPs to some of these applications. They might just look and say like, hey, but why do you need to connect one of these applications if we can replicate like half of the stuff that they're doing, and you no longer have to spend money on them, you can spend that money on us, right? And you can start them slow. You can start seeing the pattern where eventually they might start thinking about like, hey, which are some of these enterprises that I can plug out of that tech stack for this enterprise and replace it with my own solution. And you can make an argument. You can say like, yeah, but what's the incentive, right? And the incentive, I think, in my opinion, is pretty clear. In the current, especially economic environment, but also just in general, working with the CFOs throughout my life, right? There's an ongoing debate across all of these enterprises about the spend, right? Like how much are we spending on our tech stack? We have these AI tools. Why are we then spending on all this other stuff, right? So there's continuous scrutiny already internally about the spend because of the fact that with all this market, what I would call motions, pressures, a lot of these companies cannot not leverage AI, right? Like even if it's like for bare minimum stuff, they kind of have to be able to tell the audience out there on the Wall Street, hey, we're using AI and we're integrating it in our product stack in some way, shape, or form, right? Like that's internal pressure. Look at someone like Intuit who got completely clobbered over their head in the public space in the market because of the fact that they said, hey, we're not using AI for any of our like TurboTax or QuickBooks items. And they couldn't say it because they understand the moment they start leveraging it too much, there's so many opportunities for people to stop using tool like TurboTax because they can potentially just ask again Claude to go and help them calculate their taxes, right? Like not something I would recommend, but it's definitely an option. And it's definitely an opportunity out there, right? Like Anthropic can go look at the use cases and say, hey, like this is a popular use case. We see enough of inquiries coming through. Even though we might not see the data, we see that the inquiries about, hey, Claude, help me with my taxes is big enough that if we assume we can charge extra $5 each user who does this, that $5 will be way cheaper than like $150 to $200 that someone like TurboTax or H&R Block here, at least in the United States, right? Like that's a very US thing, complex tax systems. And they can see it, they can say like, hey, there's a money we can make out there. We can charge X number of dollars. We can build a business case around it and see if that money that we're going to make justifies us investing the time and effort to do this. And we can see the talk track there where we can convince people to spend money with us because it's way cheaper than them working with a CPA or working with one of these software technologies, right? Like, and it's an example of how it can transpose, right? And so again, you have this data, you have this internal pressures, and then ultimately for someone like Anthropic themselves, like they need to continue to discover new ways to grow their business, right? You've all heard enough on my channel and other channels, I'm sure, in the news about how this is a race a little bit to the bottom to some extent, right? Because they kind of like, the presumed assumption is as if we're back in like, early 2000s where there were so many different search engines, believe it or not. If you were not around that, like anyone and their grandmother tried and built a search engine, and ultimately Google completely took over the world, right? And that became the foundation of the Google's dominance, or now Alphabet dominance, across the entire kind of like last 25 years of internet technologies evolving, right? Like Google became dominant in that moment when they won that battle. And so the current ongoing assumption in the AI race is that we're not going to have Anthropic and OpenAI and Gemini and Grok. We're going to have just one of them. potentially occupying 90% of the space. And there's going to be some smaller models on the periphery like there are today, right? From the search perspective, there are some small specific use case that people still use, maybe some other existing search engines on Bing or something, unless maybe by default for the first time when you load up Windows to download Chrome and install Google. But beyond that, people assume that one of these companies will survive, all the rest will perish. And so for someone like Claude and Anthropic, as much as maybe the consideration is like, yeah, but we have these partnerships with Figma, we have these partnerships with other companies, we work with them, they welcome us into their home and we're essentially burning that home down. Yes, it's a bad feeling, but it's not as bad as seeing your company go bankrupt, right? And I think from their perspective, it's like zero-sum game right now, and they realize like, yeah, as much as we can build all these partnerships and they're great and we love people we're working with, we have to do the things like this in order to survive, right? And so you have this kind of like internal pressure from the companies like Anthropic themselves looking at the world and saying, as much as we want to play nice in the sandbox, for us to survive, it's imperative for us to become the critical piece of the tech stack for these enterprise companies, right? And I'm setting kind of like end users aside for a second, but specifically for the enterprise world, like we're already leading the market right now compared to Gemini, compared to OpenAI. So for us to cement ourselves, we need to be able to replace some of these applications, right? Like again, like Figma, like Salesforce, like Tableau, whatever people might be using. I'm sure eventually they're going to go after other solutions, right? Slacks, including communications, like things that are being concurrently used a lot. Easy enough for them to replicate, easy enough for them to maintain, and easy enough for them to go and talk to those business partners essentially within those companies and say like, hey, stop spending $200,000 a year on Slack, go spend 150 of that with us on the tokens, right? So you have enough of that kind of like perfect storm brewing, I think, across all of these enterprises. And honestly, like, it's a tough dilemma for a lot of these other companies right now, because can you really fight and combat that? Will you build your own kind of like bespoke model? Probably not. It's way too expensive right now, and unless something architecturally changes in the coming like couple of years, it's going to be hard for the companies to go and spin up and compete with the likes of Anthropic, with the likes of OpenAI. So the next best option is, okay, we cannot also, coming back to Intuit, we cannot also not use these applications, right? Because we're going to be perceived, at least as a public company, that we're falling behind. So we have to use them. So then it becomes this balance of like, how much do we use them internally, how much we rely on them, how much information we pipe through these tools, so that we still remain efficient, we still can leverage these tools, but at the same time, we don't give them enough information about the dealings of our own products that might help them inform their decision to enter the space that we're in. And I genuinely, like, off the top of my head, like, I cannot think of a way to like gracefully navigate this challenge, because there's so many different items involved, between people just not being smart and using it freely nilly, and kind of like, your own employees might give up enough information. It might not even be your information that's needed. It might be, if you're especially a public company, the information is already out there, and there's already enough of companies doing analysis of enough of industries where Anthropic might not even need really to rely on your data as much, because they can just go and survey enough information out in the world to build out the business model that helps them justify proceeding with that motion and entering the space that your enterprise is in, right? And your tool is in. And so from then on out, I think the real answer there is the fact that they cannot effectively, in my opinion, do it across like tens and tens of different industries, right? Like Cloud Code, Cloud Design is a good example where like they've been slow to roll them out. And when they roll them out, they're being kind of like seemingly cautious about what they're doing and how much they invest in it. Like Cloud Code seemed to be one of their biggest ones, and they continue to invest in it. Like Design, we'll see how long that's going to last. And if it sticks around, that might be the next kind of like pillar within the environment. So I would argue, will every single industry be affected by this? Probably not, because there are enough of specialization of certain software packages. Like there's certain types of billing software for very specific, I don't know, maybe construction, and there's some certain laws and regulations that you need to follow, and maybe there are international aspect to it between different countries and their data storage practices across different regulations, right? Like anything heavily regulated, I feel like going to be a lot more challenging for them to enter. They're probably going to stick to things that are a little bit more general, regulations, less things that differ a lot in the feature set and type of things that people do with those tools across the world and across multiple different maybe size of companies, right? They need to find something uniform, something that's easy to build a pitch around and a business case around and easy enough to maintain, where they won't have to have like 15 different specialists for certain type of industry, for certain type of country, to go and keep an eye out on the local rules and regulations and demands, right? And so if you are in those kind of industries, in my opinion, like, you're probably a little bit safer right now because of the fact that, again, Claude can only invest so much and can only do so much. So they're not going to enter those kind of industries and those kind of areas where they have to do this much. But anything more general, like, and again, coming back, a good example can be the tax software in the United States. Like, that to me almost like a slam dunk business proposition, right? Because it's pretty standardized, it's well known, it's well researched, the information is all out there. It's very specific to the United States, yes, but it's a huge market, right? Like, we have massive multi-billion-dollar companies operating in that space, and like, I would not be surprised if come the next like tax filing season or not, Claude has something more bespoke in that area, especially if, again, they feel like the business case is there and they can do enough and they don't think that there's too much risk in them producing incorrect data, right? Like, they're getting better and better at like calculation, data analysis, things of that nature. Like, Claude checks itself. Like, I use it in my work, and when I do some data analysis, I still check it myself, but you can see it spot checks itself, and there's seemingly some system safety protocols inside of the tool right now, where in Gemini sometimes you ask it to summarize like a single column, summarize to me like all these 10 values, and it's going to completely miscalculate it, right? Like, Gemini seem to be doing much better with those kind of tasks, but again, that's one speculation of where they can go with this. And it all comes back again to the same, I think, problem people had on the Amazon, because they couldn't not sell and offer their product on Amazon because it was such a great platform, and potentially the only major platform that they could reach without over investing in the brick and mortar and not having to support their own website and then having to run this SEO and SEM campaigns and bringing all the traffic and worrying about that. All the people shop on Amazon. I have to be on Amazon as a product. And people, I'm sure, face the same dilemma of like, yeah, but is my product unique enough for Amazon not to care to try to replicate it, right? And that, I think, similar right now will happen in the software world, if that kind of like metaphor parallel makes sense to you, where I suspect a lot of these SaaS companies hopefully already are talking about it. If not, hopefully something like this inspires you to talk about it. Is like, is our software unique enough and provides unique enough value, addresses unique enough set of features that would be hard for Claude to replicate in a way that they can then also maintain it long term, right? That's kind of like, I think, that the trade-off that if I would be on Anthropic side, I would be thinking about. And so you kind of have to think about it. You have to ask this question. And if you're not, you have to start, I think, figuring out from the product feature set, how do we make ourselves unique enough? Like, is there some bespoke, unique thing that we can do that will make us so valuable to specific niches that it's going to be hard for Claude to justify replacing us, but also for Claude itself, again, the ask of maintaining all these custom features might be too much, and they'll say, you know what, this looks too bespoke, we're going to go do something more general. So just as I said, it was an interesting kind of like thing as I was listening to this whole like conversation about Figma stock's reaction to Claude design, and kind of like thinking about how that again start like just ringing the bells for me from 5-6 years ago, when Amazon basically was doing the same thing with basics, and now they're pretty successful and basics are out there. And again, certain product types, they're not affected because Amazon just doesn't want to deal with that, and that was a saving grace for a lot of those product types. So I think in the software world right now, that's going to be the saving grace as well. If you're unique enough, you do something unique, or you have unique enough features, that's going to be hard for more generalistic company like OpenAI, like Anthropic, like Google to go replicate. You might be okay. For anyone else, yeah, start thinking about maybe some more unique features, or focusing on certain types of market where, again, it's going to be hard for Anthropic to justify going in and investing in people to try to replace you. So just a thought experiment. Hope it was useful, inspiring, got you thinking maybe on some of the other examples of what other companies like this doing. Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see you next Saturday. Peace.